Hi everybody. I'm gonna start with a few announcements here as we have the last couple minutes where people will be filtering in. Please take a minute to double check your smartphone or whatever device you have on you that might make noise, and please silence them. I also wanted to let you know that the Two Rivers Reading Series has a spring event coming up featuring There's Something I Want You to Do by Charles Baxter. This is on Wednesday, April 4th from 12 to 12:50 and 2 to 2:50 here in the Legacy Room. Baxter's collection is a collection of short stories set in Minnesota with some linking characters. It's a really fun book, so you can check it out. Buy a copy in the bookstore if you're interested. I also want to thank the members of the Two Rivers Reading Series who put a lot of work into today's event. I'm going to ask them to wave. They're in the back of the room there. Chris McCarthy, Jennifer Wilcutt, and Melody Heidi. And thanks also to all of the English reading and journalism faculty who have adopted A Good Time for the Truth in their classes and have supported this event. We also have a group of students visiting from Columbia Heights High School. If you want to raise your hands over there. They are concurrent enrollment students, and we're glad to have them here at this event. If you're coming in, please come on in. There's some open seats in the front row here as well. I want to thank the English Division, Multicultural Affairs, and Faculty Development for co-sponsoring this event brought to you today. And I'd also like to point out that we have some information available for you at the table as you enter. Aiden is over there with information about the Queer Trans Union group on campus, so stop by that table and pick up any information that they have. I know that a lot of you read this book in your classes, right? How many of you have read chunks of A Good Time for the Truth? All right, wonderful. We had at least 500 students reading this book in their courses this semester, so we're really excited that you're here, that you've read it, you've thought about these issues, you've maybe written a paper about it, and I hope that you are ready to ask some questions of the authors as well. After the reading, if you would like your book signed, there will be a time for signatures, and I'll have you line up starting here toward the window, so we have one line. So bring your book up, have it opened up to the title page, and they'll be happy to sign it. Some of you may be looking for an attendance certificate. We do have those. Look at Jennifer in the back. They're yellow. At the end of the session, you can get one as you exit. You may not get one before the session is over. Okay? Yes. Okay. So today's format, for today's event, each of the authors are going to read a short excerpt from A Good Time for the Truth, and then we'll follow that with a discussion and some time for questions and answers. We are thrilled today to have with us Sun-Young Shin, editor of A Good Time for the Truth, and two of the featured authors in the book, David Lawrence Grant, author of People Like Us, and Andrea Jenkins, author of The Price We Pay, How Race and Gender Identity Converge. A Good Time for the Truth is an intense exploration of racism through the voices and experiences of 16 writers of color. Collectively, the authors present a skillful examination of the layers of Minnesota culture, from the Minnesota nice surface smiles and helping hands during times of crisis to the deeper layers of what David Lawrence Grant notes in his essay is the huge, largely hidden dark side of Minnesota nice, a subtle discrimination and denial that makes racism harder to fight. A little bit about each of your panelists. Sun-Young Shin is the editor of A Good Time for the Truth, Race in Minnesota, the author of poetry and essay collections Unbearable Splendor, Rough and Savage, and Skirt Full of Black, all from Coffee House Press. She is co-editor of Outsiders Within, Writing on Transracial Adoption, and the author of a bilingual book illustrated for children, Cooper's Lesson. She has received artist grants from the Bush Foundation, the Minnesota State Arts Board, the McKnight Foundation, and the Jerome Foundation. She has taught at St. Catherine University, Hamlin University, Macalester College, the University of Minnesota, the Purpich Center for Arts Education, Intermedia Arts, Minneapolis Public Schools, and the Loft Literary Center. David Lawrence Grant has written drama for the stage, film, and television, as well as fiction and memoir. He has written major reports on racial bias in the justice system for the Minnesota Supreme Court and on racial disparities in the healthcare system for the Minnesota Legislature. He teaches screenwriting at Independent Filmmaker Project, Minnesota. Andrea Jenkins, Intermediate Art Board's Chair and Bush Fellow, is a writer, performer, educator, and activist. A locally and nationally recognized poet, she has earned many awards, fellowships, and commissions. She is an oral historian at the Tretter Collection at the University of Minnesota Archives. Please warmly welcome Sun Young Shin, David Lawrence Grant, and Andrea Jenkins.
So good to be here with all of you. To acknowledge that we're on Dakota homeland. I'm going to read a few paragraphs from the introduction. One, leave a lot of time for discussion. It's hard to talk about race across racial lines. Race is ingrained in societal systems and institutions, conferring a system of advantages upon members of the dominant group. This means that people's realities, their lived experiences, differ. Race is often invisible to those who benefit willingly or unwillingly, knowingly or unknowingly. It is entirely visible to those who do not benefit. No one wants to make an observation or share an injury regarding race and have it be dismissed, misunderstood, mocked, or worse. No one wants to feel that they are participating, even passively, in the oppression or harm of others. No one wants to believe that inequality persists and limits children's futures and abilities to fulfill their potential. I should say no one of conscience. There are some hard truths, though, that we must understand and agree upon. Race was invented by white people, Europeans colonizing the globe, as a pseudoscientific justification for the subjugation of people of color for the purpose of theft of land, bodies, labor, and culture. Race theory and racecraft were often paired with Christianization missions to subdue, convert, assimilate, or simply destroy indigenous people, who were figured as heathens, who needed saving, and who were not worthy of the bountiful natural resources of the New World, of Africa, of Asia. Historians of race have researched, documented, and eloquently described this history. There's no lack of knowledge. As to is the atrocity that was the mid-Atlantic slave trade and the vicious institution of chattel slavery. As to is the resulting legal abolition of slavery, but the evolution of peonage, Jim Crow, and other systems that kept African Americans in bondage long after emancipation and the end of the Civil War. There is a tremendous amount of scholarship, activism, education, and community work being done across the country and in Minnesota to help us recognize and dismantle racism. It really hasn't been enough, which is an obvious statement. Because understanding race and racism is not merely about mapping the contours of the lives of people of color. This work also involves understanding whiteness, the maintenance of often invisible systems of white supremacy. White privilege is a symptom of systems of white supremacy. So a great place to start learning that history is The History of White People by Dr. Nell Irvin Painter. White American scholars Robin DiAngelo, and she's going to be in St. Paul in a couple of weeks, or a week. Joe Fagan and many others are doing fascinating work on what they're calling white fragility and white racial frames, respectively. This book, though, offers different insights. Most people of color in the United States have to think about race every day, multiple times a day. We are constantly negotiating our bodies and ourselves, our identities, in a racialized society that renders us inferior, unworthy, invisible, or hypervisible. How we look and who our people are or are assumed to be are relentlessly measured against a white ideal. We are often invisible or painted as criminals, victims, charity cases without history or agency, in the news, arts, literature, curricula, political platforms. We are the butts of jokes. We are racially profiled. We fear a backlash when anyone who looks like us or could be mistaken for us commits an infraction or crime. We know others may question our legitimacy to be in a specific space or job or school or even to be in this country. We experience professional isolation. Those of us who are in the middle class or hold white-collar jobs are usually one of the few or the only people of color in the room or in the institution. We also know there are many white people who work and have worked in solidarity with us. There are white people who see their liberation as tied to ours, who are taking on new identities of what we could call white abolitionists. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Here we got snow coming today. You know, even when you know it's coming, that first couple of snows, man. I'm gonna, because we don't have a lot of time for the actual reading today, I'm gonna jump right into this without any preface. And hopefully we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. I was doing some neighborhood organizing work in Chicago during the summer of 1970. When I told a friend that I was getting ready to come live in Minneapolis for a while, he said, "Oh, brother, really? Why? Worst cops in the whole world up there." I used to volunteer at a residential substance abuse program in South Minneapolis. After finishing my last tutoring session one evening, I started walking home about 7:30 p.m. Just as I crossed the street, a car came tearing up at high speed and 3 plainclothes police officers leaped out with guns in hand. They identified themselves, and then one of them holstered his gun, threw me up against the trunk of his car, and cuffed me. I asked, why? One of the officers pulled a handgun from his boot. This was a personal, non-regulation weapon. Held it against my head, removed the safety, and cocked it. That's a hell of a sound, a gun being cocked while jammed tightly against the dome of your skull. Intimidating. I was intimidated, but more than anything, I was angry. And it occurred to me, even in the heat of the moment, that this was exactly the reaction he wanted. Like someone who lights a fire and thinks, now let me throw a little gasoline on there. Instead of answering my question, the cowboy with the gun to my head told me not to move, then shoved my head hard to one side with the barrel and said, "Wouldn't even breathe real hard if I was you. That gun's got a hair trigger." There was another reason to be wary of that gun. I knew countless stories of weapons like that produced from the boot or the small of an officer's back, meant to be placed in a suspect's hand or close to his body should he somehow end up dead by the time the encounter was over. One of the other officers finally spoke up. "Liquor store was robbed a couple blocks away about 20 minutes ago by somebody who matches your description." As they inspected my ID and the other contents of my wallet, I told them as calmly as I could that right across the street, there was a whole building full of people who could vouch for who I was and where I'd been all evening. All 3 cops heard this, but they ignored it. It was as if I hadn't said anything at all. They threw me into the back of their car and radioed that they'd arrested a suspect. As I began to pull away from the curb, a voice on their radio told them to stay put. A lieutenant pulled up in a plain car behind us and talked with the officers while I listened to the police chatter coming over the airwaves. The suspect was described as a light-skinned black male, about 5'7", like Prince, with extremely close-cropped hair and a slight mustache, wearing a knee-length, light tan leather coat. That was the only time I gave them attitude. I smirked a little and asked them, "That's supposed to be me?" because I wear glasses, and at the time was sporting a scraggly goatee. And at that time I had what might have been the biggest, baddest afro in the entire state of Minnesota. A foot-tall, brain cloud kind of afro, as far from close cropped as it's possible to get. And I was wearing a waist-length, almost sepia leather coat, nothing remotely like the one in the description. The lieutenant heard this too. He flashed his badge at me and said to them, "Guys, really? Cut this guy loose." Just like that. One of them spit, a couple of them grumbled, they uncuffed me and pulled me back out of their car, returned my wallet, and then tore up back down the street. No, "Oh, well, sorry, sir," from them. Nothing. I knew as I tried to shake it off while walking home that other scenes like this were playing out that evening in any number of other places in America. What if that non-regulation gun the cowboy cop had pressed against my head really did have a hair trigger? If I had reacted angrily and resisted, I might well have been killed, as have so many others before me and since in just such an encounter. Well, there's a history to encounters like these, and if you understand this history even a little, you understand that all the hue and cry about weeding a few bad apples out of police departments and doing some retraining will not fix our problem. It is important to weed bad apples like that cowboy out of our police departments, but the core of the problem is that although undeniable racial progress has been made, the large numbers of African Americans left behind in intractable poverty are still stuck in the same cultural space as our ancestors were when just newly freed from slavery, stuck on the margins as perpetual outsiders in the land of their birth, feared, stigmatized as criminal by nature. This mostly subterranean attitude applies in general to other low-income communities of color as well. So the hard truth is that police departments deal with communities of color in exactly the way that American society, Minnesota society, has asked them to. There's a readily observable pattern. People who find themselves routinely locked out of equal opportunity will generally find themselves locked up to roughly that same degree. It's not just the United States of America, it's any country in the world where you have an outside group or two and an inside group or two. It's those outsiders who get stigmatized as criminal by nature. There's something fundamentally wrong with these people, and locking them up is justified, even though the big external thing that's going on is that they are outsiders, therefore don't have equal access to all the good things that their society has to offer. Racially based restrictive housing covenants were declared unconstitutional in 1948, but they've continued in practice. Until 1972, thousands of municipalities had vagrancy laws on the books that were about regulating black people's lives. But even though those laws have long since been struck down, the racist beliefs that created and sustained those laws are still very much around. And as a consequence, too many police officers sometimes behave as if they're still on the books. The result is that simply being young and black or brown is a de facto status crime. It's not necessarily to do anything wrong. Just step outside on the street or get behind the wheel of your car and you could already be in trouble. Let me stop there.
Hello, everyone. You guys hear me? Yes. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
You guys doing okay? You guys awake? Yeah? Alrighty. I do want to just say thank you to Paige and to the rest of the organizers for bringing this together. Thank you to Sun Young Shin for editing this amazing anthology and bringing all of these writers together. Most of the writers in this collection I was close with and friends, but we become even closer, I think, through this process. So not only is this educational for the rest of Minnesota, but it's been community building within the writing community as well. So thanks, Sun Young. I want to start with a poem from one of my first chapbooks called Tributaries, Poems Exploring Black History. And I like to read this poem because I think it just gives a little insight as to who I am. It's called Influences. My poetry is influenced by jazz, hip-hop, and blues. My poetry is influenced by stories, those old and new, and by the storytellers too. My poetry is influenced by trees with red leaves and bare spaces where grass should be. By brocade fabrics and Maya Angelou's Hallmark cards. My poetry is influenced by White Castle hamburgers with cheese, please. My poetry is influenced by nude bodies and sex. Feel free to leave the room if this becomes uncomfortable. My poetry is influenced by women loving women and puppies. My poetry is influenced by the love that I wish for but do not have. My poetry is influenced by planes flying into buildings, exploding cars, gifted lives live behind bars in mason jars, filled up like Molotov cocktails. My poetry is influenced by hospitals where our brothers die, and prisons where our sisters cry, and schools where our children try but fail. My poetry is influenced by HIV and AIDS and the fact that 6,000 Africans are dying every day. My poetry is influenced by Langston Hughes and rivers. The Negro speaks of rivers. My poetry is influenced by Donnie McClurkin reminding us that we fall down, but we get up. My poetry is influenced by my trans sisters and trans brothers whose struggle remains under the radar until it is time to use the bathroom. My poetry is influenced by babies, Asian babies, Haitian babies, Cuban babies, Indian babies, African babies, by Afghan and Iraqi babies and their mamas who raised them against all odds. My poetry is influenced by the Reverend Dr. Cornel West, Bell Hooks, and even Saharazad Ali. Her twisted thinking keeps me on my toes. My poetry is influenced by the love that I wish for but do not have, so I give love to myself. Thank you. I just want to make sure we got a little poetry in the air, Sonia, okay? So I understand that a number of you have been reading my essay from this book called The Price We Pay, How Race and Gender Identity Converge. And so I thought I'd just read a little bit from the opening few pages, and then hopefully we can get to some questions and some conversation. We dreamed you black in your badness, made you up out of poems and lies and words to live by. And we ourselves was dreamed, most likely by some slaves, whenever they got a little space to climb into their heads and be free. So when they closed their eyes, what did they see? They saw you. Yeah, they saw me. Sekou Sandiara, long story short. There are no baby pictures of me, at least none that I have ever seen. I asked my mother about this once and she began to cry, saying, "We were so poor, your dad and I were young, black, and ignorant. We didn't have the resources to take pictures of you too. There were no cell phones or digital cameras, and we couldn't afford to go to a photographer. Poverty. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. I was born in Cook County Hospital on the heart of the West Side. My neighborhood, North Lawndale, is the same neighborhood that Ta-Nehisi Coates discusses in his groundbreaking 2014 article in The Atlantic, The Case for Reparations. North Lawndale had long been a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, but a handful of middle-class African Americans had lived there starting in the 40s. The community was anchored by the sprawling Sears and Roebuck headquarters. North Lawndale's Jewish People's Institute actively encouraged blacks to move into the neighborhood, seeking to make it a pilot community for interracial living. In the battle for integration then being fought around the country, North Lawndale seemed to offer promising terrain. But out in the tall grass, highwaymen, nefarious as any Clarksdale, Mississippi kleptocrat, were lying wait. In 1961, the year I was born, the neighborhood began to change. According to the most recent statistics, North Lawndale is now on the wrong end of virtually every socioeconomic indicator. In 1930, its population was 112,000. Today, it's 36,000. The halcyon days talk of interracial living is dead. The neighborhood is 92% black. Its homicide rate is 45 per 100,000, triple the rate of the city as a whole. The infant mortality rate is 14 per 1,000, more than twice the national average. 43% of the people in North Lawndale live below the poverty line, double Chicago's overall rate. 45% of all the households are on food stamps, nearly 3 times the rate of the city at large. Sears Roebuck left the neighborhood in 1987, taking 1,800 jobs with it. Kids in North Lawndale need not be confused about their prospects. Cook County's Juvenile Temporary Detention Center sits directly adjacent to the neighborhood. North Lawndale is an extreme portrait of the trends that ail Black Chicago. Such is the magnitude of these ailments that it can be said that blacks and whites do not inhabit the same city. The average per capita income of Chicago's white neighborhoods is almost 3 times that of its black neighborhoods. When Harvard sociologist Robert J. Sampson examined incarceration rates in Chicago in his 2012 book, Great American City, he found that a black neighborhood with one of the highest incarceration rates, West Garfield Park, had a rate more than 40 times that of the white neighborhood with the highest rate. This is a staggering differential, even for a community-level comparison, Sampson writes. A difference of kind, not degree. In the late 60s and 70s, the gangs began to take over the drug trade, primarily heroin. The intergenerational effects of historical trauma from slavery, legislative oppression through Jim Crow laws, and intimidation, outright violence, and murder create a toxic environment for any child going into their home. First grade, we were bused to Miser Elementary School, a school in a very nice neighborhood of Chicago. I was taking piano lessons. My teacher told my mother that I was a very strong student and convinced her to pay the $2 per month so that I could continue. My mother agreed, but knew it would be almost impossible for her to come up with the funds every month. In many months, she didn't, but the teacher still let me go to class. I remember one month, one of the students' envelopes came up missing, and the teacher thought I took it. She wrote a note for me to take home, telling my mom of her suspicions, And my mother wrote back that she had indeed paid that money. But that wasn't my biggest disappointment that year. You see, it was 1968, the year Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And riots broke out all over America. On April 4th, all the black kids were sent home early, and we never returned to that school again. Who knows if I would have had a career at the piano? I had a shot, but racism and bigotry cost me that opportunity. And I'm going to leave it there, and we can have some questions and discussions. Thank you very much.
All right, who has questions or comments? We also received all of your very good questions and comments too, so.
How did it affect you as the editor placing these essays together?
So the question is, how did it affect me as the editor placing these essays together? And I would briefly say it was really gratifying on all of these different levels to be able to collect some of the brilliance that I knew that all of these people were writing and had been publishing and had been sharing in different venues, but we hadn't had a book like this in the state that was all contemporary new essays by Indigenous writers and writers of color who were first and foremost artists. So it was really affirming for me as a poet to gather the wisdom of artists who I think are excellent at holding complexities and paradoxes and challenges without searching or trying to come to easy answers that don't really exist. So I'd say that was one way that it was really gratifying. Thanks.
To Mr. Grant,
Yeah.
do you think Minnesota Nice is more harmful or helpful?
Well, keeping up an inefficient and unhelpful frame of reference and way of dealing with the world should be, it would be a positive to undo that, not only for the people who are affected by it, but also for the people who perpetrate it. So it's a win-win, for the people who are victimized by those attitudes, and for the people who, continue to perpetuate them. So I guess the core of what lies behind the question, I'll throw back at you and everybody in this room. I mean, what's the difference, do you think, between being nice and being kind? I see you wrestling with it, but if somebody else wants to speak up first, what, you look like you were close. Yeah, you.
I would say being kind is like more out of your heart, probably. Like you're actually meaning it and being able to just what everybody expects.
Okay, so what she's saying for those who couldn't hear is that being kind is something that the person who's receiving that kindness from you perceives as coming directly from your heart. That it's coming from someplace deep and undeniable. Whereas being nice is more about appearances. It's more about staying superficial. So I'd say, I think you're totally right on. I see a lot of heads nodding in the audience. And so, yeah, for me, it's a little bit like the difference between somebody who hears your mother's just died, and they tell you, with all sincerity, oh, geez, I'm so sorry for your loss, If there's anything we can do, just let me know, you know, and then it's like, see ya, right? And they kind of move on. Whereas being kind is more about sitting down with you, maybe holding your hand, maybe just sitting down close to you and not saying a thing for a while. And then maybe what you want to talk about is, even if you haven't lost your mother, you've lost somebody close to you, a grandparent, a friend, right, a great aunt or uncle, and you know what it's like to process that experience of loss and personal grief. And so to sit with somebody and say, yeah, you know, I've been there, and I tell you what, I know y'all are super busy over at the house with all the funeral stuff going on. I'm going to tell my mom, she and, you know, my cousin who's staying with us for a couple of weeks, we're going to cook you guys up a couple of meals and we're going to bring them over. See, because you know when people say, well, is there anything we can do? That's so passive, right? And often it's just an easy way for the speaker to excuse themselves and be done with interacting with you. They just want to move on. Whereas somebody who's showing you kindness and saying, look, I'm in this with you, and I'm not going to ask you what I should do. I'm just going to figure out something I should do, and I'm going to do it. Right? So that's a very different approach. But I think that kind of hints at, like, you know, what needs to happen here to move beyond what we call Minnesota nice. Wisconsin people know the same thing. They think of it as Wisconsin nice. Same thing as North and South Dakota nice. It's the same stupid thing, right? And we all need to get done with it and turn it into kindness, which is a much deeper thing. It's an active thing. Just like it's not okay, it's not enough to just be non-racist. You got to flip that and become anti-racist, which means you get busy, right, about undoing the harm that's out there instead of just personally saying, well, I'm against it, and isn't that enough?
Can I just comment on your anti-racist statement? And
Please.
then I know there's a comment here and maybe over here. I'm anti-racist, right? And you might wonder, well, you're black, why are you? I mean, because we all live in this culture and society that embeds racist thoughts, ideas, drilled into each and every one of our psyches every day. So I have to actively work to not be racist, to not be sexist, to not mock disabled people. Like that, it's all of our responsibility to be anti-racist. And so just because I'm black, it doesn't excuse me from that, right? I have to work to disarm myself from the negative messages that get drilled into us by the media, by the news, by schools every day. And so when I challenge people to become anti-racist, it's not that I am blaming you for this behavior. I'm in this same fight with you, and if we want to live in a better society, a more equitable society, we all have to be anti-racist. Yeah.
I want to add that since you're students and your job is to learn and to think critically about ideas, and because there's really not much about, I didn't talk about why I wanted to put this book together, and that's one of the questions on this, but to just move back a little bit. You know, the United States as a nation, as a government, is very young. It's a very immature system. And it doesn't, the way that it is and the way that it was founded on white supremacy and genocide and theft and colonialism, it doesn't have to keep following that path. It was a series of choices. It continues to be maintained by a series of choices and institutions, but it can be changed. So that was one of the things that, I mean, in theory, that whiteness was invented as a social construction and has all of these different elements that keep it sustained. But we need to think about the nation and look at it through, and I think this is related to kindness too, a human rights framework, which is about justice and a deep equality and a deeper democracy, certainly than we've ever seen here. I wasn't born here, so my perspective is always that of an immigrant lens. And when I was born on the Korean Peninsula, and that has had the same ethnic group for 8,000 years, same language, basically the same people. And so the United States as a pluralistic, multi-ethnic people is just like the blink of an eye, but America is invested in social and political, cultural amnesia because that's how it can marginalize our collective conscience so that we can keep participating in the racial capitalistic system that we have. And when I was born, my country was, and still is, in a civil war. I was born under a military dictatorship. The president had declared himself president for life. It was a totalitarian, militarized state sponsored by the United States. It had been colonized by Japan. So all of these things, we need to think about everyday racism in this bigger picture of the United States as an empire that has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners, right? 5% of the world's population, but produces 25% of the world's trash, and on and on and on. So the human rights abuses against indigenous people and people of color are part of this larger system that keeps our 1% and, on a continuum, wealthy and safer from climate change, all these things together. So even though you're in different classes that are in separate disciplines, really I encourage you as an older person to think interdisciplinarily. Anytime you can do things that look at race intersectionally through all these different lenses, that's what I think one of the powers of this book and my colleagues is, that it's not a monoracial, monoethnic. That kind of work doesn't work for me because I was adopted to a white family, so race and difference has always been a big part of my life and my identity. So anytime you can do that in your classes, by looking at different disciplines and looking at the United States really in a healthy, critical way, that's how we're going to move forward. And I have a lot of hope for your generation. You're the most diverse, and that is a real strength. So I'm glad you're here. No, we don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to say that whatever you can take from this book and keep going with new ideas, that is going to move us forward. And I really thank you in advance.
So I think there's a comment here, or a question, and then over here,
In the back.
and then in the back.
So my comment was not the question. Are you saying the fact that when you relate back to the Minnesota Night, kindness of one is forced and one is not? Are you making that?
No, I wouldn't say that one is forced. The question is between Minnesota Nice and being kind. Are we saying that Minnesota Nice is a forced thing?
No, being nice.
Yeah.
And the kindness is not really forced, it's just flow.
Yeah, okay. Is niceness a forced thing, but is kindness something that flows? Well, in a way, I think that's true. I mean, I think you can't fake being a kind person. You either are or you aren't. And if you are a kind person, if you have learned to become a kind person, then you do things motivated by the fact that you're not looking to get praise from somebody for, isn't he a nice guy, is he a nice person? You're doing it because it wouldn't occur to you to treat people any other way, right? Other than the way that you yourself would like to be treated when you're hurting or when you're fearful about something, right? So I don't know if we're saying that, but we are saying that niceness has a superficiality about it that defines it. Often being nice is about, it's kind of like, you know, I used to be a preschool teacher many lifetimes ago. And teaching kids to go beyond, you know, if they stepped on somebody's foot or if they broke their neighbor's toy. And to work with them on learning how it's not okay just to say, oh, sorry, and then move on like nothing really happened. Right? You have to go deeper with people. And kindness is about that, I think.
On niceness, I just want to share my perspective. I think, you know, people can act really nice because really they're just afraid of getting disapproval.
Right.
So they just put on, you know, the mask that keeps all the disapproval away from them. And it can be terrible.
Yeah, niceness is often done for public consumption, right? You know you've got an audience and you want to feel like, okay, everybody saw us, I said the right thing, right? And then you move on. But kindness sticks around, you know, and doesn't just ask, well, you know, what can I do? Kindness figures out what I could do and does it, right? To kind of be with you, to, you know, the old saying, to walk a mile in your shoes, right? You had your hand up in the back too.
Yes, as people of color, do you guys see the one that causes the most problems? Does the media cause the most problems? Does the police cause the most problems? Because I'm reading the news, I'm like, hey, they're to blame, they're to blame, they're to blame. Who causes this ripple effect? Because you know how this one thing that you put on TV can cause so many things. This one thing on the news about this cop shooting can cause so many things. What do you think causes the main reaction to all this becoming? Because something has to happen up here to affect everyone down here.
Well, did everyone hear the question? Who is the culprit of, and I guess, who is the culprit of the oppression? Or
Yes,
who is
because
the culprit of the
someone has to
dissension in our
spread it.
lives?
Someone has to influence it, because
Who's
if
the
no one
cause of
influences
racism?
it, doesn't spread.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's the media, though the media is somewhat complicit, right? But
I'd say it's not any one thing, it's a lack of knowledge in a lot of different places, right?
right. Yes.
All right, let's not interrupt while they're talking, okay? Let them answer the question.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
it's fine. It's a dialogue. It's a conversation, right? So, but thank you. I think it is a combination of many things, but it is really an embedded system of a philosophy that white people are the best people on the planet. And it is not just the United States thing. I mean, we see these issues being played out all throughout Europe, all throughout Eastern Europe, all throughout the world. And it has created a system of this almost permanent underclass. And, you know, I write in my essay, for those who have read it, you know, when I talk about white supremacy, I'm not talking about any one particular person. But at the same time, it's this system, but the system is created and perpetrated by people, right? And so every day that we are not trying to actively undo racism, you know, that's why David said it's not enough to just say I'm not a racist and then just keep going to Whole Foods, right? Like, you have to be actively doing something to end it. And no, you don't have to march on Washington every day, but you can assign a book that may help somebody understand these issues more fully. Or you can write a poem that expresses your feelings. Or, you know, you can help your neighbor who may be a different race or culture, as opposed to just saying, sorry to hear about your mom, let me know what I can do. Like, step in and do something. So I don't think there's one main factor beyond patriarchy, white supremacy, and sexism, and racism that is creating this this level of inequity in our culture and society. And I think we're pointing our fingers in the wrong direction if we think it's the media.
Okay, we only have time for one more question.
We came from a student of color.
I have a question for that. So, only one area about race, is it here
When I came to Minnesota from, I lived in Boston for a year. Before that, I grew up in the Chicago area. And so when I came to Minnesota to go to continue my undergrad at Macalester College, I came to St. Paul, and I thought I was transported to Legoland. Like, it was so clean and square, you know, and like everyone seemed so buttoned down. Like, not only did everyone like, it was like, this is the whitest place I've ever been, which is true. And I just was shocked. There were no people of color on TV and in the news, local news media. There were no people of color on public radio here. There were no people of color in government here when I came in the 90s. And it was like a different planet for me, coming from where I'd grown up. So, right, I mean, I've been thinking about race my whole life, and race and nation and ethnicity and war, but when I came to Minnesota is when I really started focusing on what is this thing, whiteness, and what does it have to do with how this state, not just how this state operates, but how Minnesota, as one of the most racist states statistically in the country, what it has to say about how race is lived in the United States. So ever since then, I've been thinking, reading, learning, writing about it, and just a culmination of decades of pondering these issues here.
It was a good time.
It was a good time. Yes, we're out of time, a couple minutes over, but thank you so much for your attention and your work.